Chapter 8. Concerning a Pedantic Discourse and the Profound Misunderstanding of Artistic Endeavour.
And without further ado, I give you Crispin Shrike.
The deputy festival organiser tugged at her sleeve one last time and glided from the small stage. The responsibility of the record, Professor Crispin Shrike, was projected on a screen, overlaying a photo Carrie was sure she'd seen before. The chart room's intimate space seemed to shrink further as Shrike approached the lectern. He surveyed the sparse audience, a small, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips.
Thank you, Claire. Well, this is rather more intimate than the Royal Court Theatre, isn't it?
He began, his voice all crisp vowels and a confident, rising intonation that could make ordering fish and chips sound like a lecture on Chaucer.
Though one rather hopes those of you here made the discerning choice. Sandy's undoubtedly charming the masses with tales of Botswana. But you, I trust, have come for something altogether more substantial.
Jesus wept, Carrie thought, already regretting every step that had brought her here. Discerning choice. We're the leftovers, mate. She lifted her camera. Through the lens, Shrike looked even more pleased with himself, as if being the consolation prize was actually a victory.
Those of you who've done your homework know the essentials.
He continued, a slight smile playing at his lips.
First at Oxford, a doctorate at 26, 6 books that reviewers invariably describe as meticulously researched, which one rather suspects is critic speak for good but won't trouble the bestseller lists.
The self-deprecation was so calculated it had decimal points. Carrie's finger tensed on the shutter release, almost taking a shot out of reflex. Click perfect. Caption. Man congratulating self on humility. He paused, clearing his throat with a precise, almost musical sound.
I mention this not to bore you with my CV, though I assure you it is quite remarkably unvaried, but because credentials do rather matter when we're discussing the sacred responsibility of historical fiction.
Sacred responsibility. Carrie shifted in her seat, the leather creaking. Of course he'd make writing biographies sound like performing last rites.
My life, I must confess, is embarrassingly ordered,
The professor admitted, almost as if confiding a minor vice.
A house in the Cotswolds, a wife named Margaret, 2 boys at Harrow, and approximately 3,000 books that Margaret claims are a fire hazard. One rises at 5, writes until noon, and then, rather predictably, researches all afternoon. 2 days a week I lecture. Excitement, one finds, is often limited to discovering an unrecorded mention of Disraeli in someone's diary.
Ordered, Carrie thought, crossing her arms. Or embalmed. When was the last time you did something that wasn't scheduled a month in advance? A woman in the front row gave a small, appreciative laugh, as if he'd just shared a particularly clever in-joke. Her meds must have run out. The man beside her was already checking his phone. What would Lucy say? With a theatrical sigh that suggested great matters were about to be discussed, Shrike removed his jacket, folding it with the precision of someone who'd been taught properly at age 7. Then came the sleeve rolling, each turn deliberate. Carrie noticed his watch, a vintage Omega that probably cost more than her camera. His hands were soft, unmarked by anything more strenuous than typing.
Right then.
His tone sharpened, shedding any hint of collegial warmth. It was the voice of a man addressing a first-year lecture hall, not a small gathering.
Let us discuss our duty to the ghosts of the past.
He moved away from the lectern, hands clasped behind his back like a particularly earnest monarch inspecting the troops.
We who write about history are not, one submits, mere creators. We are custodians, archaeological excavators of human experience. And like all responsible archaeologists, our first commandment is this: thou shalt not contaminate the site.
Unless you're contaminating it with your own bloody ego, Carrie thought, her fingers pressing grooves into her camera. She shifted in her seat, the small movement releasing a fraction of the tension building in her muscles. The small audience leaned in. Even Phone Bloke looked up briefly. The professor had that gift of making opinions sound like carved tablets from Mount Sinai.
The past speaks through fragments, does it not?
He moved his hands expressively. For a moment, his controlled expression broke. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. A faint flush rose on his cheeks, and the tremor in his fingers seemed to vanish, forgotten.
Documents, photographs, parish records, court proceedings. These are not suggestions for our imagination. They are facts, immutable, unchangeable. Our sole responsibility is to string these facts together with absolute fidelity.
He paused, letting the words settle.
The moment we begin to invent, to fill gaps with what we think might have been, we commit, quite frankly, an act of violence against those who can no longer correct us.
A surge of outrage fired through Carrie's mind. Grrr! Good photography hinted like a haiku. The viewer felt the emotion from the details. They weren't looking at security camera stills. They were seduced and romanced into seeing things beyond light and shadow. The factory floor photograph on the screen blurred as her focus narrowed on Shrike's self-satisfied expression. She took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to calm the surge of adrenaline.
It is a particularly egregious betrayal.
He continued, voice dropping for emphasis.
The kind of historical libel perpetrated by those more interested in a good story than a true one.
As opposed to what? Carrie's thoughts burned through her. A dull story? A lifeless story? Or just your story?
Consider Jane Austen.
He went on.
She wrote about her contemporary world, documenting drawing rooms she'd actually sat in and social conventions that would have made her want to scream. She is the exemplar of the true historical writer, though she wrote not of the past, but of her present.
Carrie nodded, her head movement sharp and tight. Yes, Professor, because she was observing her own time, not 200 years gone.
She didn't invent grand sweeping emotions unsupported by a rigid social code. She didn't manufacture dialogue or plot points merely for dramatic effect.
No, she just invented entire bloody people and put words in their mouths. Minor details.
Her genius lay in her sharp observation, her keen wit, and her uncompromising fidelity to the observable truth of her society.
Yes, Carrie almost groaned. Jane had a keen eye and sharp mind, but she wasn't reporting actual people in situations, was she? She was writing fiction, telling lies for money.
She focused on what people said, what they thought, how they felt, how they misunderstood each other spectacularly, and then somehow found their way to happiness, all within the strict confines of her observed world.
The professor's eyes found a few faces in the crowd.
More writers would do well to dig into Austen to observe and emulate her manner of describing a world and culture, instead of just making things up to suit a modern audience. Jane Austen is timeless, precisely because she is so scrupulously truthful.
A muscle twitched in Carrie's jaw. This is exactly the kind of academic wank that turns history into taxidermy. Jane Austen's eyes would have twinkled with lively wit. She wasn't a waxwork in Regency gown and cotton bonnet.
Let me demonstrate.
He clicked a remote with a flourish. Behind him, a portrait flashed onto the screen. A young woman in Victorian dress, her eyes direct and challenging.
Letitia Cameron's work, circa 1890. Cameron, as some of you may know, is the subject of my next book, and she presents the perfect case study, even for those unfamiliar with her rather singular genius.
Despite herself, Carrie sat forward. She'd spent months studying Cameron at uni, had written her dissertation on Victorian women photographers. Cameron hadn't just taken pictures. She'd captured souls, found the universal in the particular. The woman had understood that photography was about truth, not facts.
Cameron received her first camera at 48.
Shrike explained, a hint of awe in his otherwise clinical tone. His voice quickened slightly. His gestures became less rehearsed.
Remarkably late, yet what she achieved was nothing short of revolutionary.
Click. Another image. A weathered working man, his face mapped with hardship, but his eyes unexpectedly gentle.
She had access to something previous artists could only dream of. Technology that could capture reality with what one might call absolute precision.
Absolute precision, my ass, Carrie thought, switching lenses with angry fingers. These photographs were about connection, about the moment when someone let their guard down and allowed themselves to be truly seen. The crisp detail or the soft focus, that was intentional, you pompous git.
Observe this image carefully.
The screen showed a young maid, half smiling, her hands folded.
What do we see? Cotton dress, second-hand, worn at the seams, calloused hands indicating manual labour, slight dental discoloration suggesting nutritional deficiency. These are facts, indisputable, empirical.
Facts. A knot of pure irritation tightened in Carrie's gut. An image flashed in her mind, sharp and sun-drenched. Nate, the New Mexico lawyer, standing hip-deep in a stream, only a swirl of water away from complete nudity. The surprise in his deep eyes was a truth more profound than any fact Shrike could dig up in an archive. Then she pictured Todd, the photographer from yesterday, his face creased in a laugh she'd deliberately provoked with a silly joke. She'd sent him the photo with a smile in her own eyes, a constructed moment that was somehow completely true to his cheerful spirit. Fun. Alive. Everything this boring old fart wasn't. Carrie felt her breathing quicken. Shrike was talking about history, but all she could see was a man who had never learned how to live in it. Carrie raised her camera, focusing on the man's face as he gestured at the screen. Through the viewfinder, she could see what he couldn't. His own performance, the way he was reducing a living woman to an inventory. Click. She'd caption it, "Man missing the bloody point."
Cameron's genius,
He continued, warming to his theme, a rapid-fire earnestness entering his voice.
lay, I contend, in her embrace of emerging technology. By 1890, flash powder had revolutionized the medium. No more endless rigid poses, you see.
He ran a hand through his hair, leaving a strand standing up in boyish disarray. For a moment, he looked almost human.
She could capture subjects, as it were, in flagrante delicto of being themselves. She was documenting reality with a precision no painter could achieve, a truly modern sensibility, one might argue.
A woman 2 rows ahead nodded sagely, as if this was profound rather than completely arse backwards. Carrie wanted to shake her. Cameron's portraits were never about documentation. They were about revelation.
Which brings me rather neatly to my central thesis.
Shrike's voice took on what he probably thought was gravitas, though it also held a slight, charming flutter of nerves.
When we presume to tell these people's stories, we must, absolutely must, be guided solely by evidence. We must resist projecting modern sensibilities onto them. We must never, and I cannot emphasize this sufficiently, never read between the lines.
The words landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Her breath hitched in a sudden, audible gasp that made the woman next to her glance over. Reading between the lines was where everything that mattered lived. The unspoken love, the suppressed rage, the quiet desperation, the unexpected joy. Without that, you had nothing but a bloody shopping list. Click. Another slide. A group of factory workers, faces ranging from suspicious to amused. Now she recognized it. Cameron's genius wasn't in the cumbersome equipment of Victorian photography, but in picking the exact right moment to click the shutter.
Look at these faces.
Shrike urged, his gaze sweeping the room.
We might be tempted, quite understandably, to imagine their thoughts, their dreams, their fears. But that, alas, would be fiction of the worst kind, replacing demonstrable truth with sentiment, however well intended.
Sentiment. The word echoed in Carrie's mind like a slap. Her shoulders tightened, her camera pressed against her eye socket so hard it would leave a mark. You wouldn't know sentiment if it hit you over the head with a fucking library. One of the workers, a girl no more than 14, had her chin lifted in what Carrie recognised instantly as defiance. Another, an older woman, had her hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. The gesture screamed mother or protector, a whole story in the curve of those fingers. But Crispin saw none of it.
What we know is quantifiable.
He insisted.
Their clothing indicates economic status. Their postures reveal their work. Their expressions show camera awareness. Anything beyond this, one argues, is projection, fantasy, wish fulfillment.
Carrie uncrossed and recrossed her legs, the movement sharp and irritated. Every muscle in her body felt coiled tight as a spring. You absolute bloody drongo, she thought, her eyes drilling holes in her target. You're looking at human beings and seeing statistics.
My forthcoming book about Cameron will adhere strictly to these principles, I assure you.
He was in full flight now, pacing before the lectern with growing animation.
Every scene grounded in documentary evidence. Where records are silent, I shall be silent. Where facts are unclear, I shall not speculate. One wishes, of course, for more complete records, but one must work with the evidence one has been given.
Carrie saw a cascade of faces. Nate's, vulnerable and real. Todd's, crinkled with manufactured joy. The factory girl on the screen, her chin lifted in defiance, all of them pulsing with stories this man would erase with his obsession for facts. She took another shot, the sound of the shutter louder than it should have been in the small space. A few heads turned briefly. The professor didn't notice, too caught up in his own lecture.
This, I submit, is not limitation but liberation,
he declared, returning to the lectern with the satisfaction of a prosecutor who'd just nailed his closing argument.
It frees us from the burden of invention and allows truth to speak for itself. Rather like Jane Austen, actually, who, despite her mastery of character, never invented a single ballroom she hadn't observed herself.
The elderly woman beside Carrie was actually taking notes. Christ almighty.
In conclusion,
he said, his voice reaching what he clearly considered a crescendo.
We who work with history have one duty above all, fidelity to fact. We are not storytellers, we are truth-tellers. We do not create, we reveal. And in that revelation, that strict adherence to what actually was rather than what might have been, we honour those who came before us.
He looked out at his small audience with the expression of a teacher who'd just explained something very simple to particularly slow children.
I trust I've made myself perfectly clear. Thank you.
The sparse applause was polite but confused as the deputy chair rose to thank the professor, glanced at her watch, and announced that there was a little time for questions. Carrie didn't clap. She sat perfectly still, camera gripped in tense hands, feeling like she'd just watched someone perform an autopsy on a rainbow and declare it was just refracted light. He wasn't honouring the dead. He was performing an autopsy and calling it a portrait. Her face felt hot. Her jaw ached from clenching. Every muscle in her body was coiled, ready to spring up, to shout, to tell this self-satisfied wanker that he was about to murder Letitia Cameron all over again with his facts and his evidence, and his complete bloody inability to see what was right in front of his face. The question wasn't whether she should say something. The question was whether she could trust herself to speak without actually throwing her own camera at his perfectly groomed, catastrophically thick head. She raised her camera one more time, framing his smug expression as he waited for the questions he was so certain he could answer. Click. The sound felt like a verdict, decisive and irrevocable. That one, she thought viciously, is going in the portfolio under crimes against art.